like to put my base on the inside, the middle of the tree, because more moisture is on the outside of the tree. So as it dries, it's going to warp more. And I prefer a lot more warp on top than I do on the bottom. It also is going to change what the inside of the bowl looks like. I don't have a great example, but if you look inside this one, you've got more of circles. Let me see if I can get in here, Effie. Or ovals in this case. You've got ovals instead of crossing grain like you do if it's turned the other direction there. So for me, this is a more pleasing look to the bottom, and that's why I choose to have the base of my pieces be the inside of the tree as opposed to the outside of the tree. And as far as orientation of the goes, this would be just like any other bowl blank that you might start with. It's going to be not a spindle where all the fibers are running this way, but it's going to be a bowl blank where all the fibers are running side to side and rotating at you there. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. The reason why I did it the other way is because I know there's a little bit of a crack here on top, so we might want to take that out. I didn't want that to be my bottom. Here we go. Now, when getting it into the chuck, because it is a little bit wet and it's a little bit soft, what you also can do is look at your grain orientation, try to line that up with your jaws. And what that'll help with is when your jaws clamp down and squeeze on the piece, they will squeeze in a more even way than if it was just willy-nilly in the chuck any direction right there. Especially if it is very evenly cut when you first cut it with your chainsaw and bandsaw, it'll compress the same amount on either side. And it'll help keep a nice round surface. Now, I'm going to redo the entire surface on this, so that's less of an issue here. But if you didn't want to have to redo the outside, and you'd want to make sure that when it was clamping concentric so that it had a good clamp on it and wasn't going to warp or make the piece go out of round. So if I start this back up, we're going to see it's not too bad. But if it was a lot more wet, it might be slightly out of round, and you'd need to go back and redo the outside there, or at least shear scrape the outside so that you have a nice round piece. Because if you do really thin walls, but you did not recheck how round your piece is on the lathe, when you're getting really thin, you're going to find that one wall or one side of the wall is thinner than the other side. And if you don't judge that properly, you'll go right through the side as well. I don't think we're going to have that problem tonight, but it's something to think about. For this, yes, and because it'll help me get inside here real easily. Other tool rests, like the one that is using with this lathe here, or most of the tool rests that I usually use, have a much thicker base to it, and they have trouble getting in these small holes. And since I want to have that support inside there, this round bar is very helpful for doing that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to finish shaping the outside here. And it's a pretty small piece, so I'm going at a pretty high RPM. You don't have to. You can go a little bit slower if you want to. This is at 1200 RPM, but somewhere around 1000 RPM is where you want to do your final cuts at, or maybe a little bit more if it's a smaller piece. Now, cutting up this way is pretty nice to do, but to get around that corner there, you do need to stop and adjust. So you can cut downhill here. And I'm still using just the same tool here, the swept back tool. I haven't gone to any other tool yet. because you generally don't need to. And here's where I want to think about, where do I want my base? Where do I want it to be? Where do I want the bottom of my base to be, so that I know kind of where it's going to end up when I take the tendon off, because this is a pretty big tendon for a pretty small piece. So there's a lot of material that I'll remove there at the very end to actually have a nice small little bowl here. So that's pretty good. And you definitely want to kind of feel where the bumps are. You want to actually move your hand kind of quick over it to actually feel where are the bumps on that, to feel like, okay, did I miss anything? If you move it slow, your hand's not going to register where that bump is. But I know there's a little ridge right here, and I got options on how I can take that out. And the base there is not too bad. That's actually pretty good. So I could either, go ahead and recut this. I could do a shear scrape, just kind of remove that little bump right there. Any method that you want to use, you can do. I'll probably just shear scrape it right here real quick. And then we'll see the difference kind of in finish too, from the push cut that I did coming up here to that shear scrape, and how that looks. So the great thing about this tool handle is that I can take this tool out when I'm going to shear scrape, so I can get right where I want to be. All right, that feels a lot better to me. Now I'm fine with a shear scrape here, because I think I mentioned it earlier. With these, I've been sanding them starting at 320 and then going to 400, and then I'll use just a nylon pad, and that's it. So I just want to make sure that my 320 will actually kind of remove what I want to right there. And if not, then I'll go back. Yeah, I'm going to do that again. There's still a little something right there. There we go. Now, if you had a piece of wood that was difficult to cut, or it had some fibers in there that are tearing out, what I don't need to do here, but what you could do is grab that bottom tool. And we're going to look at this here as we start to do the front face right here. With this bottom tool, has kind of a steep angle on it right here, but makes a nice clean shearing cut, because you can use the edge of the tool there that is on the back side of the tool as opposed to the front. What I mean by that is, if I am coming up around this way, I'm going to use this portion of, there we go, this side of my tool and wing. But with this tool, I would actually use the opposite side of the flute and the wing to make that cut. We'll do it right here, and it'll make a little more sense, I think. All right. Now we're just going to clean up this face first, and then kind of decide where we want our opening to be, and if we want to move it at all. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to use any hollowing tools or anything like that tonight. We're just going to use pretty standard gouges that you would normally use if you're making a regular bowl. So far, we haven't used anything but that one gouge. Now we're going to go to this tool. Who has ever used a bottom bowl gouge or a bowl gouge like this? Mike, where do you guys use it? Right. really just kind of like on that bottom section, right? Like that bottom third of like an open bowl. And what we're going to use it for is actually basically from where this turn starts all the way down to the bottom, because that's where this tool works really well. This the swept-back tool works really great at cutting into this, but it doesn't do a great job of getting around that corner because its bevel is so steep that it's going to just go right through the wall. So we're going to use it to remove all of our bulk material that we want to get rid of, and then we're going to go back to this tool to get around that corner and get around that curve. But let's see how this tool actually works. So I was kind of mentioning that you can use the front of the flute or the back side of the flute with this tool, and that's going to depend on where it is and also how much material you want to remove. If you engage the front part of the flute right here, it's going to be a lot more aggressive tool to remove material. Let's take a look at that. Let's pretend this is the bottom of a bowl. So if I'm using the kind of the front of the flute there, it's a little bit grabby. And it gets kind of nice big shavings to it. They're not bad shavings, but it can be a little bit more aggressive than you might want it. So if you use the back of the flute, which means your handle is going to be further back here. It takes this kind of a finer cut, and it's more of a shearing cut because the part of the bevel or the part of the flute that you're using is this portion right over here. On more, well, it's not really the wing. You want to use the tip as much as you can, engage very little of the wing, but because you start to go up the wing, you get that curve there that makes a nice slicing cut. It's kind of like it's cutting it more like a 45-degree angle than it is at more of like a straight cut. And so that's why it makes more of a shearing cut when it does that. If you're using the front edge over here on this side, it's going to that wing is going to dig in, and it's going to go into the wood instead of going across the wood. We want it to go across the wood so we get a nice smooth transition there across the bottom. It takes a little getting used to, and this has a really high bevel angle on it right now. This is about a 70-degree bevel angle. This one has a 40-degree bevel angle, which I wouldn't use this on the bottom of a bowl, but you can kind of see how I'm riding that bevel, and I'm using the backside of the nose of the gouge and the backside of the nose of the gouge and the side of the flute there to do the cutting instead of the. Yeah, see how that kind of just digs in like that? And what we want to do is to glide across. There we go. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. Matt does the heavy relief there, which I started doing. But that, I mean, when you're working with this kind of a tool, whether it's a bottom bowl gouge, you're doing that same idea, where you're using kind of the back side of the nose and the flute to do that cut right there. And for a long time, I didn't know that, and I was using the front side, and I was like, why is this tool so very aggressive and grabby when I'm using it, trying to get a smooth cut? It wasn't until I learned to use the back side there that suddenly became a much more refined tool to use to get those clean cuts going through. But Matt Monaco does use this kind of a gouge on both the exterior and interior for a lot of the finishing cuts that he does. Yeah, he essentially what I'm showing you here is similar to or almost exactly what he does and how he does it. So it's and you know, this gouge looks very similar to the gouges he uses. It's the same idea. His, I think, sweep back probably a little bit more than mine does right here, which is perfectly fine too. But that very fine, very thin bevel on top right here is what's important so that you can you're not going to push with any more of the tool than you need to. And that's going to prevent it from bouncing, creating other ripples and things in your piece right there that you don't want. There is a very big swing with this tool, and you can see how far my arm is over here when I have to start it. And that's because of the kind of extreme bevel angle right there. For me to get bevel contact, I have to start way over here, and I have to end up way over here. So you pick up the cut, and you're way over here, and you need to move through the cut. And that is something that Matt did show me, was you really need to move and swing all the way through the cut so that you've got the bevel contacting over here, and you're not letting it hang out, and then you're going ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk into the middle of your piece right here. Let's look at how we sharpen this real quick. Is that all right? And you can see kind of, hopefully, a little bit more of a close-up on what this tool looks like and how it's sharpened. So I have this platform set to 40 degrees, which is what I have at home. And a lot of my tools that I use are based off a 40-degree bevel angle, so I leave it at that. This tool is the primary bevel up here. There we go. Is at about 70 degrees. So to get that, I'm actually going to bring my tool up to the stone, lift it up until I get where I want to go, and then I'm going to rotate it to get my wings taken care of. If you wanted to, if you needed a 40 degree, which I have, I'll show it on the platform. To get this grind, all you got to do is rotate the tool on the platform and then swing for the wings just a little bit. And then to get the heel removed, I'm going to move that way up here on my grinder, and then just rotate back and forth. And it doesn't really matter how much of that heel I remove or how pretty it looks. What matters is that the primary bevel is nice and thin, and it has a solid grind all the way around, so you get a nice smooth cut with that. But we don't need to worry about how pretty this is. We just want to get rid of the material. Yeah. Now, because we're not taking the wings back too far, you don't need to swing too much. I'm probably only taking it back maybe 5 to 10 degrees or so, just really so that I have clearance getting around the curve when I'm on the inside there. So for this one, I'm going to bring it up, but since my platform is not at the right angle, 70 degrees, I'm going to raise my tool up, and I'm just going to move it side to side. I could even do it off the platform if I wanted to. What you want to look for is actually get your view over the top. My grinder's a little bit lower. This is a little bit higher. But get a view over the top so you can see when your cutting edge is contacting the grinding stone, and you'll see a little burr or a little color start to change right there, and you know that it's contacting the right spot. And the really nice thing about that is that if you need to change your angle, you can change it pretty quickly on the grinder like this without you can change it pretty quickly on the grinder to adjust to the exact spot you might need. So right now this is at 70. If I need something more like 60, I can easily bring that back down to 60. And if I need to, there we go. If I need to bring it higher, I can bring it up higher if I need to too. But only having that little bevel there makes it easy to grind back and forth. There we go. All right, let's try it. I know there's like plenty of videos on how to use like a bull gouge like this. They generally don't have this extreme of a heel removal right there, but it's the same exact motion that you're going to go through. And for this, that extreme heel removal is going to help us get around that corner right there. So again, with a sharp tool, we're going to use the back side of the flute and nose. So that's what it's going to look like, but further in. So let's go ahead and remove some more material on this and actually get that undercut going and then try to get around that curve. So one of the reasons why I moved the headstock way over here is so that I can come around the end if I need to, get a little bit better angle to get the tool in the right spot. And all we're doing is just removing as much material as we can with this tool before we go to the other tool. And I want to get a little bit of light in here so I can actually see what I'm doing, because now I'm really inside the piece right now, and it's overhung. So I got to kind of get in here and see where I'm cutting. And when I'm looking at this, I'm not actually looking at my cutting edge where I'm cutting here. I'm looking more on the far wall because I can see that a lot easier and seeing where the cut is and where it's going to. And that's just an easier place to spot and keep an eye on, as opposed to trying to get my head all the way over here to look at the tip of the gouge right there. And now that we've got that initial material removed, we want to just shape this rim right here in some way. Because it is oak, you got to be careful. It's going to tear out if you try to scrape it. So we're going to try to do just a little bit of a cut in and the other thing you want to be really careful of is once you start undercutting this is that you want to make sure you know where your fingers are, because if they come in contact with this edge right here, and it's kind of sharp, you could cut, right through your finger. So you just want to be careful of where these edges are and maybe round those over if you want to have them rounded over. So we can do that by coming from this side and just gently softening that edge right there. So now it'll be a little bit nicer if my finger actually contacts over there. So to get this undercut, what we're going to do, this is where one of the limitations comes into play, is that if my gouge is only at a 45-degree angle, I'm limited on how far I can actually get my tool in to this piece. So I need to make sure that my shape will allow for that and isn't too far. I didn't bring the one that I failed on because it was too far. But I need to be able to get my tool into the piece down into here. And so if I have, let's say, a 60-degree bevel angle, I'm not going to be able to do that because the 60-degree bevel angle is much more blunt and it won't allow me to get all the way over to here. So that's where the higher, the lower bevel angle, 40, 45 degrees, is going to let you undercut that a little bit easier. Did anybody ever undercut a rim like this far before with a gouge? No? Have you undercut like a little bit, like on a Calabash or something like that? It's the same idea. It's just you're at a much more extreme angle. I'm going to be over here to make sure that my bevel is headed in the direction of my my shape, to make sure that I get it going in the right direction. And that's an important thing, is that your bevel basically is going to travel in the direction, or your tool is going to travel in the direction of the bevel. So if you line that up first, then you've got an idea which way it's going to head. I'm just going to sharpen this up real quick. So, what's that? It can, yeah. If you're going to go thin on it and it's wet, it'll start to warp kind of right away. The other thing is that if you're going to go thin, or even if you're not going thin, but if you have just a a decent wall right there, if you hollow all this out and then try to go back through, it will either change shape because it's going to dry a little bit as you're turning it and it's going to warp, or there's just not going to be enough support, and there's not enough support below it, and that can push. You can get a lot of bouncing that'll happen there, especially if your bevel is bouncing against the wall right here, and that'll cause your cut to go off track. Yeah. So for this this gouge, it's just a standard gouge. You can use a one-way Varigrind, whatever you want to use. This is a woodcut tool, which I really like because it's indexed, so I can always change my numbers and they go right back to the same spot every time. You want to start with the wings. And then just do a pass on the nose right there to blend it all in. And the great thing about the jig is you don't really remove that much material each time. It's very small. So your gouge is going to last a lot longer. And here I'm just, again, removing that extra heel area so that I can get in that curve without it causing too much of a bounce when it's inside there. Yeah. So this is the jig here. A Varigrind, you can get kind of the same exact setup there. I have mine sticking out quite a bit because I have my leg set at one spot, and then I do all my gouges with that one spot there. So I have to stick these out quite a bit sometimes. But it's just a standard jig that you might use. Yeah. The jig makes it very repeatable, very quick, and also, as I said, it takes off very little material. Matt Monaco does it all by hand, and that's the way he prefers to do it. That's what he's always done. So it's really just whatever your preference is and what you're comfortable with. So the next cut that I want to make here is really going to be my last cut on this upper area here. I'm going to remove a little material and then take one more kind of finishing cut, and then that's all that I'm going to do. I'm not going to come back. I'm not going to touch this spot ever again. As you're talking about, Mike, right there, I don't want to go back and redo this after it's already moved a little bit. So I'll just remove a little more material here to get it out of the way. And then when you, who's ever done hollow forms? I know a few of you have. What do you have to do all the time after you make cuts? You have to stop and clear out all the shavings. And you're going to have to do the same thing here. I had a spare piece of tubing lying around. This is really handy, actually. Just don't inhale when you're on the hose. Don't ask me how I know that. So we're going to go in. It's going to be about a half an inch or so here, and this is going to be our final cut. And I want to try to float the bevel as best as I can and try not to push the bevel into the wall, because that's going to cause a bounce and it's going to cause some ripples going on there. And I want to hope I didn't go too close there, but I think that feels pretty good. This is where some sort of caliper comes in handy, so you can check and see where you're at. You can actually take a little bit more off there. And again, I'm not looking at the tip of the tool. I'm looking at the inside of the piece over here, so I can see where the material is coming off of. That lets me know where I need to stop and start, so that I am not going to go into this big block of material here. So we'll remove a little bit more material out of the middle area. Whenever it gets a little bit stuffed up there, stop it, get all those shavings out. And I want to make sure that I don't go too far and go through the bottom of the piece over here too, because it's not very big. And one wrong cut will go right through the bottom. All right, so that is almost to about right here, which is about where we're going to stop using this gouge and transition to the other one. Well, look how far over I am. That's why it's handy to be able to come around, so you're a little bit more comfortable. I'm going to rub the bevel right here to find my cut. And just take it nice and easy. You're not trying to remove a bunch of material. You're trying to get a finished cut right there. Yeah, that feels pretty good. And if you don't have calipers or anything to measure with, you don't need to. Just use your fingers. The better you can do with the fingers, probably the better off you are over time. So we're going to remove some more waste from the middle right here, and then we're going to try to get around that curve. And here is where having a small tool rest will come in handy, because I can actually put it in to my opening here, keep my tool supported. Make sure I did not go too deep there. Now we're all right. Once I start to feel the bevel on this lifting, as I'm trying to come around the corner right here, I know that I need to switch to a different gouge that has a higher bevel angle. Instead of 45, I need to go to something like 60, so that I can get around that corner right there without losing the bevel contact that I want. And so this, we'll see if this will work here. I might need to go to a different gouge. I think what I'll do is I'll remove a little more material in the middle, and then that'll give us a little bit of a better way to, yeah, because we're pretty close right there. Yeah, did you hear that little chatter there? That's where we know the bevel is no longer in contact. And that's where we know that, and this is on the bottom, we knew this is going to happen. But that's where this tool is going to be able to keep contact. And not have all that chatter that we have when we lose our bevel contact there. You want to borrow it? So this is a 5/8 tool. It's just a much smaller tool than the 1/2 inch tools I've been using. And to get around that curve right there, the smaller tool just take a smaller cut. So I think we're going to end up using that in just a minute. Another thing too is when you get to the middle with any tool, you want to slow down your cut because the middle of your piece is the slowest part of the piece as it's spinning. The outside is going to be your fastest. The middle is going to be moving very slow. And if you force your tool through that middle right there, it's just going to tear it right out. So you slow down your cut, and then you get a nice smooth finish down there at the bottom. And we're in pretty good shape right here. I think we definitely have some more material to remove. You also want to check your tool rest to make sure that it's not going to rub against the piece after you've locked it down. You also don't want to drop your tool rest into the piece while you're working on it and make a big dent. Okay, so with the smaller tool right here, this is what's going to be handy for getting around this inside curve, this big curve right here. If you only have a larger gouge, a 1/2-inch gouge, you can just use whatever you have. But this smaller tool is just going to take a smaller chunk or a smaller cut. But I really need to get the handle brought all the way around as I'm doing this right here. Did you guys hear that little like noise there? That little noise just lets us know we're getting a little vibration off the tool because it is a very thin tool. And so we want to come out or slow out of the cut right there. We're pretty good. I'm going to take another cut right there to see if we can get a smoother arc. And you'll notice too that the tool doesn't have a really closed flute. Go ahead and zoom in actually. It doesn't have a closed flute. The flute's open. It's not necessarily open up all the way, but it's pretty flat so that you can use the proper portion of that, the nose of your tool to get around the corner there. If you close it up, it's going to start using that lower wing there and become more aggressive. Now, one of the hardest parts is getting that transition from where your other gouge kind of stopped and then starting with this tool to get around that corner right there. You can tell on a couple of these pieces, if you put your finger in there, you'll probably find the line. And that's okay. That's just what I did right there. But if you can make that line disappear, then you know you've got a good curve going around that piece there. I'm going to go back to the bigger tool to get a little bit more of the bottom removed there, and then we're pretty close to being done. And you can definitely feel when it's not right and when it is right. And that's a great indicator try to know when it is right is get your finger in there, get your hand in there and try to check it out. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, we're just going to take another pass or two on the bottom right here to kind of finish the bottom, and then I think we're going to be all set. Yeah. Now I haven't really gone to adjust any of the angles right here. If the piece was bigger, I might need to grab another tool that already is set with a different angle to get around this curve right here and then towards the bottom. For the bottom right here, you're going to have a higher angle so that you can get to the bottom on the bevel without hitting the rim of the piece. Because if you hit the rim of the piece, well, lots of fun things can happen there. You could just bounce off it. You could make a dent. It could go flying. You could do nothing. But we want to avoid that. So we're going to try to ride the bevel here and not touch the rim. All right, there's a little nub in the middle, so we'll take care of that. And then maybe take one more pass there. And remember, we want to go slow right through the middle there so we don't tear anything out. And just kind of glide on through it. Now we're going to come back here and take our final cut. Or final 5 cuts, maybe. It's never just one last cut, right? So I lifted off the bevel right about here. You can't see it, but I can see it. And so I got a little ripple we're going to take out there. It's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, I think at this point, what I would probably do is sand it with 320 and 400 and then turn it around and take off the bottom. I'm kind of out of time for that tonight. But that's generally what I do on these. And kind of as I mentioned there, like if you put your fingers in here, you're going to feel it is pretty rough. And that's why the sandpaper at that high grit right there is going to take off some material, but it is still going to leave a lot of the marks that you have in there. And for the pieces that I'm doing here, I think that's kind of nice. You kind of see a little bit of the work that's going into it if you're picking it up and feeling it. But if you want to polish it all up, you can polish it up real nice too. There is still a little bit of a divot there at the bottom, but that'll come off real easy. So, yeah. Anybody have any questions? You can use any number of things. I have used, this is actually a vacuum chuck, but I didn't use vacuum on it. It actually sat right in the hole right there. And then I brought the tailstock up and then I took the end off there, and then I cut it off with a saw, and then I just sand the bottom round like I've got there. I also have a jam chuck that I can put in my chuck right here, put it right up against that, do the same thing, take as much material as I can, finish shaping that bottom. And this is where you got to be careful not to go through the bottom as well, because you can reshape the whole bottom there and then accidentally come out with a very thin piece at the bottom there. So you want to avoid that. Measurement is a key thing right there. You can use a vacuum chuck depending on how big the piece is and also how wet it is too. If it's really wet, you might want to avoid a vacuum chuck because it will suck moisture in through there. Make sure you've got a moisture filter on your vacuum chuck for that. Yeah. These are just all a little bit of walnut oil. That's it. I didn't even put any type of wax or anything on them. With oak, I really like how if you kind of burnish it with the nylon pad or a high grit sandpaper, I really like how that turns out. And then just oil works really well for what I've got going. I don't like to put any like heavy coating on the outside. I think that takes away from the texture on these. Yeah, this is a gray pad. This is a Merca. I think it's like 1500 grit pad. But if you go to like Woodcraft, they have like the white pads. That would be similar to this. No, I don't think so. Yeah. And I don't know if this has abrasive in it or it's just rated at that. I think it's the fineness of the nylon. Yeah. But these are much nicer than steel wool, especially with wet wood. Wet wool will react and turn the whole thing black. One of those pieces definitely reacted to something. So the nylon pad is nice. It's a little bit safer, doesn't catch fire, and can also slip out of your hands real easy, which is a good thing. Yeah. So for next month, turn any kind of a bowler form with a undercut rim. It doesn't have to be this extreme. It could be something very simple, but just try to get a little inside curve that the rim of your piece is smaller than the widest part of your piece right there. All right. You're welcome. What's that? These are Andre Martinez.